A few cards have been revealed so far from Whispers of the Old Gods, either through the announcement or through the championship tournament. There were a few cards revealed throughout the days. So, here's a quick look at all of them. Polluted Hoarder is kind of a look at the evil version of Loot Hoarder. Note the pun in the name, fantastic job. It is a lot like Gnomish Inventor in that it's a 4-mana 2/4 draw a card. Gnomish Inventor is, and this is a 4-mana 4/2 draw a card, although it requires Death Rattle to die, so it requires dying in order to activate. This is a theory, but Silence is kind of getting removed, so having a Death Rattle draw card isn't that bad. You can't silence the card draw off anymore. There's also this debate between, is a 4/2 better or is a 2/4 better if the effect is both to draw a card. Hard to say whether a 2/4 or a 4/2 is better strictly. However, in general, 2/4 is better for a control deck because the main goal of your Gnomish Inventor is to deal with a 3/2 and to be able to kill two things or to be able to deal small amounts of damage to a thing and still survive and then deal with another thing. Polluted Hoarder is a more aggressive card, so maybe we'll see aggressive decks use it and still keep up with the card draw. In Constructed, I see it as being on the verge of playable. In Arena, it should be a great card. Loot Hoarder is a good card. Gnomish Inventor is a pretty good card. Polluted Hoarder is going to be around the same level as Gnomish Inventor, although arguably it might be better than Gnomish Inventor just because you can actually play this card on turn 4 and be happy, unlike Gnomish Inventor where you'll fall behind doing so. Corrupted Healbot is another evil counterpart to your lovely antique Healbot. So instead of restoring 8 health to your hero, it'll restore 8 health to the enemy hero. Now you might look into this card and be like, why do I want to restore health to the enemy hero? Of course you don't. But similar to Zombie Chow, it's just a card which has a really good stats for its mana cost. 5 mana 6/6. That's really good. The best version that we have so far for a vanilla card is Pit Fighter, which is a 5 mana 5/6. In addition, this is a mech. If there's some mech synergy bonuses that you're hoping to get. If you are a priest and you have Alchemized Soul Priest in play, that'll end up dealing 8 to the enemy hero. All of this said, though, I think that this is too slow to get going, even with Zombie Chow, which is a 1-cost card, in Alchemized Soul Priest. You weren't really able to control the dying of the card. So, as an efficient minion, I don't think this is efficient enough to justify it over Pit Fighter in Constructed. That said, though, in Arena, where Pit Fighter is a good card, Corrupted Healbot, where board control is pretty much the whole game, a 5 mana 6/6 will be quite good. It's Eater of Secrets, the card that people have always wanted for that pesky, mysterious challenger. So if you manage to destroy one secret, it's 4 mana 3/5. And that would make it value, because a 4 mana 3/5 is okay. In addition, you got rid of not only an opponent's card, but also the mana spent to play that card. Obviously, if you get rid of the whole Christmas tree, then you're getting either +4/+4 or +5/+5, and then that's a 4 mana 6/8, or it's 4 mana 7/9, which is amazing. That said, though, since it seems to me like Mysterious Challenger is going to be taking a break from Standard, since it is losing Avenge, Eater of Secrets might not really see much. Worth noting that Kazan Mystic came out in Goblins vs. Gnomes as well, so this is kind of the secret-hating replacement. It'll always be there to keep secret decks honest, though it's not that vital. It's not as good as Kazan Mystic when dealing with secrets. In Constructed, this will come out and see play similar to how Kazan Mystic sees play, if the format ever becomes ridiculously secret-heavy. And Mysterious Challenger is still in the format, so maybe someday. But it would require a lot of secrets to be in play for Eater of Secrets to make its way into an actual Constructed deck. In Arena, this card is going to be really bad. Validated Doomsayer is another cool little counterpart to a card, and while I'm on the topic of counterparts to cards, I will go ahead and say that this expansion is pretty much exactly what I was looking for in terms of coolness of an expansion. So, People have asked me a lot, what are you looking for in an expansion? And I've always been like, okay, just put in good cards with some kind of flavor tying it all together. There's no need for a new mechanic, there's no need for anything. Just let the players kind of decide what to do. So all of the cards we've seen so far are kind of independent. And the generally cool theme is that it's evil counterparts, or just counterparts. So Validated Doomsayer is a counterpart to the Doomsayer. And he's really happy, he's finally right, that the end is coming. So that's a 5-mana 7/7. And that would be pretty good, except it's at the start of your turn, set this minion's attack to 7, which means it's a terrible play if your opponent has a board. And it's very difficult to assure yourself that the opponent isn't going to have a board when you play the Validated Doomsayer. So this card isn't really going to work out. In Constructed, it's too slow. It's similar to Gurubashi Berserker, which is a 5-mana 2/7, and whenever it hits something, it becomes like a 5-mana 5 whatever. So indeed, the dust is coming when you get Validated Doomsayer. Not to mention, if you play it against the priest, it gets Cabal Shadow Priesthood, and you're very sad. It does play around Big Game Hunter, and it does play around Aldor Peacekeeper because it continuously sets its minions attack to 7, but it's still no good. In Arena, I think this card is also going to be poor just because it is difficult to set yourself into the position where you can play the Validated Doomsayer and have it survive. Your opponent will get some free hits on it, and it's kind of like a win more card. Kind of on the average to slightly weaker side. Got Hogger, the Scourge of Elwynn, another evil counterpart. So Hogger got buff. This has been compared to Trogzor a lot. Also a 7-mana 6/6. With a very cool effect. Unlike Trogzor, which people hyped up and thought was really good, and then it turned out to not be as good, is this card doesn't require the opponent to do anything. You're the one who can simply damage a bunch of it, and then summon a bunch of nulls, similar to how Grim Patron works. Now the question, though, is why would you play Hogger over Grim Patron? And that is a valid question. In terms of value, and I've started to think about these cards as value by a bit because that's how you can really evaluate it. You can compare it to Nixia, where it's a 9-mana 8/8 and then you get a full board of 1/1s. That seems to be mainly the goal of Hogger too. You play the Hogger, and then you do a bunch of damage to it, and then you get a board of 2/2s. Let's say you've somehow miraculously managed to do 4 damage to Hogger the turn you played it. You get a board of a 7-mana 6/2 and 4 2/2s, which is actually quite bad against quite a lot of the spells. So maybe you do a 7-mana 6/3, and then you get 3 2/2s with taunt. Is that good enough? I don't think it is. And I think it's too slow, so I don't think the card will see play in Constructed. And in Arena, it's a 7-mana 6/6. It is worth mentioning that at the very least, it kind of has Death Rattle, summon a 2/2 null with taunt. So it's kind of like a 7-mana 8/8, which is actually decent. In Arena, this will definitely see play. It's a good card. In Constructed, I feel like it's just a touch too slow. Stand Against Darkness, the new monster for battle. Instead of 3 mana, summon 3 1/1 Silverhand Recruits, you get 5 mana, summon 5 1/1 Recruits. Turns out when you scale the cards up, this turns out to be kind of favorable. Because now you have 2 more 1/1s just being annoying. It's very difficult to deal with all of the cards at once. But the big downside is you do not get the free you do not get the free Light's Justice to go with it. This card can be compared with Dark Whispers, which saw no play, but Dark Whispers did cost 6. And the Silverhand Recruits can be buffed by Quartermaster, which no longer exists in Standard. This card is fair, and it is better than a 5-mana 5/5, but no one's playing a 5-mana 5/6 Pit Fighter. I think this card's a bit too slow, but it is on the borderline of competitive, probably. In Arena, this card's going to be also quite reasonable. Yes, you sometimes get swiped, which feels really bad, and it's kind of like an overcommit, unlike Muster for Battle, which is like a minor commit. But when you're casting this card, and then you get swiped, it feels really bad. That said, though, you don't always get swiped in Arena. It's kind of like a 5-mana 5/5, except even better in the sense that you can use the 1/1s to attack however you want so you don't overkill as much. Like, say you're up against a 5-3. Instead of sending your 5-5 into it, you can send 3 1-1s and have 2 1-1s left over. So Stand Against Darkness seems like a fair card. Fair card doesn't make it into Standard that many times, but who knows. We've got Giant Sandworm, which is just a huge beast for hunters. 8 mana, 8/8. If it kills a minion, then it can kill attack again. So that's pretty fun. If you give the card Immune with either Bestial Wrath or Stable Master, the Giant Sandworm can just clear out the opponent's board, and this has been talked about a bit. However, the big downside is that it requires you to play an 8 mana card as an 8/8, and then it does nothing on the turn that it comes out. Now certainly, you might be able to charge it somehow with a card like Tundra Rhino if the Tundra Rhino is already out on the board, but Tundra Rhino is a card that your opponent would immediately kill as well. So maybe there's some way to cheat out the mana for Tundra Rhino and Giant Sandworm, but seems unlikely. A card that can be directly compared to Giant Sandworm, though, is Foe Reaper, which is a card that's been around for a long time, and it hasn't seen any play just because it's too slow. As an 8 mana 6/9, and it takes less damage when attacking something, and it threatens to clear the board, most people will prioritize killing the Foe Reaper. But the bad news is, the turn it comes out, it's very weak, since it has low stats for the amount of mana you spent on it. But, just like the Foe Reaper, in Arena, this card is going to be quite good. It's just a big card, has a huge effect that threatens the entire board of the opponent. So it's almost like 8 mana, 8/8 taunt. Unless you're about to die. Now let me get to the Cthulhu cards. Cthulhu and Company. Cthulhu, for those who didn't know it, is going to be a card that is going to be included to everyone the moment the expansion comes out. And Cthulhu is an old god, which is a card that you're going to build around. 10 mana 6/6, deal damage equal to the minion's attack randomly split among all enemies. I've been thinking about how high an attack value Cthulhu has to be in order for this to be a good deal. As stands, if you were to play it with absolutely no synergy whatsoever, then you would just play it and then you get an Avenging Wrath. Avenging Wrath is a 6 mana card that deals 8 damage, randomly split among all enemies, and it's all very light play before expansions came in and introduced new better cards. So we can kind of establish at a baseline that 6 mana deal 8 damage randomly among all enemies is not that good. So along with thinking about how big Cthulhu has to be, we can say, what if Cthulhu gets a simple buff to +2/+2? Then it's 10 mana 8/8. You get an Avenging Wrath the turn you play it. So that would mean you get the Avenging Wrath effect rolled into a 4 mana 8/8 as well. And that turns out to be better because when you combine cards together, it becomes stronger. See Sludge Belcher, see other cards kind of with that type of combination bonus. Obviously, the goal of a Cthulhu deck is going to be to have all of these cultists in your deck as well, which buff Cthulhu, and then you play the massive Cthulhu finisher, which may or may not win the game by itself, but Cthulhu's cultists are no chumps either. Based off of the cards revealed so far, and I'll be covering them all pretty quickly, those cards are like decent, and you play a bunch of decent cards, and then you play a really, really good card at the end, and that deck is going to work. And I'm sure a lot of testing has been made in order to make a Cthulhu deck at least somewhat viable / competitive. So I think that Cthulhu is going to be pretty good. You're going to see a few classes played in different ways depending on what the classes Cthulhu related cards are. Needless to say, Cthulhu is awesome. There are some ways that you can cheat Cthulhu so that you get to activate it again. Note that the Cthulhu's attack and health value is permanent, so even if you return Cthulhu to your hand in a way such as Shadow Step or Brewmaster or other ways, you are going to be able to play a Cthulhu for another huge battle cry. Things that have been hypothesized so far is you get your Emperor Thorsan to tick on Cthulhu and Youthful Brewmaster, and then on 10 mana you play 9 mana Cthulhu and 1 mana Brewmaster. Or in Rogue, you play Cthulhu and then you Shadow Step Cthulhu. Or you somehow get a discount enough so that you can play Bran Bronzebeard and Cthulhu, such as by discounting Bran Bronzebeard via Shadow Step and then getting a tick off of Emperor Thorsan, and then you perhaps finish the opponent by playing Bronzebeard and then Cthulhu. So all of this is possible. It's very difficult to evaluate how good Cthulhu is without seeing literally all 16 of the cards that have to deal with Cthulhu. But for now, we're going to see a few of them. Worth mentioning as well is that in Arena, Cthulhu and his cultists, which are cards that reference Cthulhu, they will not show up in Arena. Just because there would be so many cards that don't have the effect of helping Cthulhu. Because what are the chances of picking a Cthulhu, right? Beckoner of Evil. Very simple. All of these cards so far that have been revealed with Cthulhu tend to just be decently statted cards which help Cthulhu. So this one seems reasonable. You can think of it as a 2 mana 2/3. You give a card a +2/+2, so almost like a 2 mana 4/5. And remember, Cthulhu deals extra damage based on how buff it is, so it's like a 2 mana 4/5 and deals 2 damage randomly. Of course, it's far delayed, but 2 mana 2/3. It's not a terrible card by itself, and it helps something in the future a big way. I think this is going to be a very tame Cthulhu card, and again, really hard to evaluate these cards without seeing all the cultists. I'd say this one is tame. Twilight Elder, 3 mana 3/4. And again, that's fair stats, probably even better than 2/3, which is why the Cthulhu buff on this one is smaller. I don't think it's a card you have to immediately kill, because giving your Cthulhu +1/+1 isn't that important, so you can afford to leave this card up on the board for a little bit if your opponent is playing a Cthulhu deck, because presumably they are. You'll be able to see the Twilight Elder buffing the Cthulhu after all. But yeah, really not much to say. It's a 3 mana 3/4. We'll see whether or not Cthulhu decks are viable. Twilight Elder, and yes, in theory, you can get the Twilight Elder to stick around on the board forever and then buff Cthulhu for so much, but still, it's the 3 mana 3/4, and in just natural play, the Twilight Elder is going to die, and it seems like it's a bit too slow to combo with something like Stealth or something sneaky. It'll just take too long to set up. And finally, we've got a card that doesn't buff Cthulhu, but plays off of having a big Cthulhu. So all of the classes are probably going to have a little bit of a different flavor with Cthulhu, and Druid is going to be one of them that perhaps cares about your Cthulhu being big already. Klaxxi Amber-Weaver is a card that is Yeti stats already. Similar to the other two cards, it has decent stats. This one probably has the best stats. And if your Cthulhu is already at least 10 attack, then it's a 4/10 for 4, which is a bargain. All you have to do is buff Cthulhu for +4, and then your Klaxxi Amber-Weaver is a 4/10. And that is a big reason to already play a Cthulhu deck, to be able to play a 4 mana 4/10. That thing has killer stats. There have been decks built around for less than this. For example, Priest builds around a 3 mana 4/7, where you play the Blade Master and the Circle of Healing. Not as clear cut, but in a similar way to 3 mana getting you 11 stats, this Klaxxi Amber-Weaver is potentially 4 mana for 14 stats. So again, very, very difficult to evaluate any of the Cthulhu cards, just because you really need to see all 16 of the Cthulhu cards in order to know, okay, how easy is it going to be to get my Cthulhu to 10? Am I going to have to use Twilight Elder and Beckoner of Evil specifically? There's got to be better ways to buff Cthulhu. And if it's easier to buff Cthulhu, then Klaxxi Amber-Weaver is going to be somewhere between amazing and terrible. And when I say it's somewhere between terrible and amazing for Klaxxi Amber-Weaver, it's as terrible as Yeti can ever be terrible, which is to say it's always going to be at least decent to slightly below average, because Yeti doesn't see that much play. So I'll narrow it down somewhere between, instead of terrible to amazing, it's going to be slightly below average to amazing. Now that's 11 cards out of the 134. So many more to go.
Now I've got a tale to tell you of the ones from long ago. There's an evil that's been dreaming, but now it's softly screaming. From the darkness, their power will grow. Their voices are made of poison. When you listen, you are sure to be disturbed. You can lock your doors. You can say your prayers. No creature can resist their wicked words. Never mind, no need to worry. That's all just a story. of the whispers of the old gods.